They thought they had silenced him forever. When my grandfather died, my siblings didn't shed a single tear. They just wanted the keys to the safe. They spent 3 days tearing his study apart, looking for money, convinced they had finally won. But in their greed, they missed the loose floorboard under his favorite chair. I didn't. I pulled out the old cassette recorder, shaking the dust off, thinking it was just his favorite jazz music. It wasn't. What I heard on that tape wasn't the rambling of a sick old man. It was a confession. It was proof, and it revealed a betrayal so deep it made my blood freeze. They tried to hide this tape for a reason, but to understand why they were so terrified of his voice. I need to go back. Before I take you back to that cold afternoon in the study, I'm curious. I know families like mine exist all over the world. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? What city or country? It comforts me to know I'm not sharing this story to an empty room. The aftermath of the funeral, the old family house. Heavy, cold rain against the windows. Key emotion, grief versus greed. The rain on the day of my grandfather's funeral wasn't just rain. It felt like the sky was weeping the tears my siblings refused to shed. We were standing in the grand hallway of the Victorian estate that Arthur, my grandfather, had built with his bare hands and decades of sweat. The house smelled of damp wool, lilies, and that distinct dusty scent of old paper that always clung to the walls. While I was still wiping the mud from the cemetery off my shoes, feeling a hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe, my brother Mark and my sister Eleanor were already in the living room. They weren't reminiscing. They weren't looking at the old photos on the mantelpiece, photos of us as children, sitting on Arthur's lap. No. Mark was on his phone, pacing back and forth, his voice low but urgent. "The market is peaking, Elena. If we list the property by next week, we can bypass the probate delays. If we just find that document, we need to liquidate before the end of the fiscal year." Elena was nodding, her fingers tapping impatiently on the arm of Arthur's favorite leather chair, the chair he had sat in every evening for 40 years. She didn't sit in it. She treated it like furniture in a showroom. "I know, Mark, but we have to make sure Lucas doesn't drag this out," she whispered, casting a sideways glance at me, standing by the door. "You know how sentimental he gets. He'll want to keep every spoon and old newspaper." I tightened my grip on my coat. Sentimental? Is that what they called love? For the last 5 years, while Arthur's mind began to drift like a boat unmoored from the dock, I was the one who was here. I was the one who learned to cook his favorite soup because he forgot how to use the stove. I was the one who sat with him through the nights when the shadows confused him, holding his hand until he fell asleep. Mark and Elena? They sent checks. Occasional, polite checks to cover expenses, accompanied by Christmas cards, signed by their secretaries. They were busy. Mark was a corporate lawyer in the city. Elena ran a high-end art gallery. They had no time for a dying old man who told the same war stories on repeat. But to me, Arthur wasn't a burden. He was my father figure. My parents had passed when I was young, and Arthur took us all in. Mark and Elena took his money to build their empires and left. I stayed. I stayed because I saw the fear in his eyes when he couldn't remember the word for water. I stayed because he was the only person who ever looked at me and said, "Lucas, you have a good heart, and that's worth more than all the gold in the bank." That afternoon, the house felt enormous and hostile. Without Arthur's laughter, without the sound of his cane tapping against the hardwood floors, it was just a pile of expensive bricks. I walked into the kitchen to make tea, a habit, I suppose. I reached for 3 cups, then stopped. My hand trembled. I only needed 1. They were drinking expensive scotch from the crystal decanter in the library. As the kettle boiled, memories flooded back. The kitchen was where Arthur and I had our best conversations. He would sit at the small oak table, peeling an orange, his hands shaking slightly. "Lucas," he had said to me just 2 weeks ago. It was one of his lucid days. His eyes, usually cloudy with cataracts and confusion, were suddenly sharp, piercing blue. "Lucas, listen to me." "I'm listening, Grandpa," I had replied, adjusting the blanket over his knees. "There are wolves in the forest," he whispered, leaning in, "and some of them wear silk suits." At the time, I thought it was the dementia talking. He often spoke in riddles near the end. He would talk about hidden treasures and tests of character. I just smiled and held his hand. "You're safe here, Grandpa. No wolves." He had squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "You're a good boy, Lucas. Maybe too good. You need to open your eyes when I close mine. Do you understand? When I close mine, you open yours." Now, standing in the silent kitchen, that memory sent a shiver down my spine. When I close mine, you open yours. I poured the tea, the steam rising like a ghost. I could hear Mark's voice booming from the library now. They were arguing about the vintage car collection in the garage. They were dividing up his life like butchers carving a carcass, and the body wasn't even cold yet. I felt a surge of anger, hot and blinding. But beneath the anger there was something else, a nagging feeling. Arthur was a meticulous man. He was a man who planned everything. He kept journals of the weather for 50 years. He labeled every tool in the shed. Would a man like that really leave his legacy to chance? Would he really leave everything to the two people who abandoned him and leave me with nothing but memories? It wasn't about the money for me. It was about the house. This house was his soul. Mark wanted to bulldoze it to build condos. Elena wanted to sell the antiques at auction. The thought of this place being destroyed made me physically ill. I left the tea on the counter and walked toward the hallway. I needed to go to his study. I needed to feel close to him one last time before they stripped the room bare. As I approached the heavy oak door of the study, I heard a crash. The study. Action. The search creates chaos. Lucas finds the clue. Suspense, psychological unease. I pushed the door open. The sight broke my heart. The study, usually a sanctuary of silence and order, looked like a hurricane had passed through it. Books were pulled off the shelves and thrown onto the floor. Drawers were yanked out, their contents spilled onto the Persian rug. Papers, receipts, letters, medical records were scattered everywhere. Mark was standing by the window, red-faced. Elena was on her knees near the fireplace, sifting through a stack of old files. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "He's been dead for less than 24 hours. Mark spun around, adjusting his expensive tie. "We are looking for the updated will, Lucas. The lawyer said Arthur mentioned a codicil last month, but he never filed it with the firm. If we don't find it, the estate reverts to the 2010 draft, which is complicated." "You're destroying his things," I said, stepping into the room, stepping over a pile of encyclopedias Arthur had loved. "We are securing our assets," Elena snapped, not looking up. "And yours too, if you weren't so naive. Unless you want the state to take 40% in taxes, help us look." "I'm not helping you loot his grave," I spat back. Mark stepped closer, towering over me. He was older, broader, always the alpha. "Don't take that tone with me, little brother. You lived here for free for 5 years. You leeched off him while we were out working. The least you can do is help us find the document that ensures we all get paid." Leeched off him. The words hit me like a physical blow. They had no idea. They didn't know about the diaper changes, the sleepless nights, the spoon feeding, the terror of watching the man you love forget your name. I turned away, fighting back tears. I walked over to the corner of the room near the old velvet armchair where Arthur used to listen to his records. This corner seemed untouched by their rampage, probably because they thought there was nothing of value there, just an old record player and a stack of dusty vinyls. I sat in the chair. It still smelled like his tobacco and peppermint. You know, sometimes you feel like a stranger in your own family, like you're speaking a language no one else understands. If you've ever felt like the black sheep just because you cared too much, then you know exactly how I felt in that chair. This story is for people like us. I close my eyes, trying to block out the sound of Elena rifling through papers. I rested my hand on the armrest, my fingers brushing against the floorboards. Tap, tap. My finger hit the wood. It made a hollow sound. I froze. I opened my eyes and looked down. It was the floorboard directly under the right leg of the chair. It looked perfectly normal, flush with the others. But I remembered something. I was 7 years old. I was playing hide and seek with Arthur. He had hidden a chocolate bar for me. "Look for the spot where the house breathes, Lucas," he had said. I had found a loose board then, hiding a tin of toy soldiers. Was it the same board? I glanced at Mark and Eleanor. They were arguing about a safety deposit box key. They weren't paying attention to me. To them, I was just the grieving, useless younger brother sulking in the corner. Slowly, carefully, I shifted the heavy chair just an inch. The floorboard had a tiny scratch on the edge, almost invisible. I hooked my fingernail into the groove. It didn't budge. I tried harder, my heart hammering against my ribs. It lifted. Just a fraction. Enough to see darkness underneath. My breath hitched. I looked up. Mark was facing the window. Elena was stacking papers. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my house key, and used it as a lever. The board popped up with a soft creak. I stopped, terrified. "Did you hear that?" Elena asked, pausing. "Hear what?" Mark grunted. "Just the house settling. It's old, Elena. Everything here is rotting." She went back to her papers. I exhaled. I reached my hand into the dark cavity beneath the floor. It was cold and filled with cobwebs. My fingers brushed against something hard. Metal. Plastic. I wrapped my fingers around it and pulled it out. It wasn't a document. It wasn't a will. It was a small grey plastic box. An old shoebox, actually, taped shut. But it was heavy. I kept it hidden between my legs and the side of the chair. I peeled back the tape silently. Inside, there was no paper. There was a portable cassette recorder, an old Sony model from the 90s. And inside the machine, there was a single tape. The label on the tape was handwritten in Arthur's shaky script. It didn't say will or assets. It said, "The truth about the wolves." My hands started to shake uncontrollably. Wolves. The same word he used in the kitchen. He hadn't been hallucinating. I quickly shoved the recorder into the inside pocket of my coat. It created a bulge, but my coat was loose enough to hide it. I needed to get out of here. I couldn't listen to this with them in the room. "I need air," I announced, standing up abruptly. Mark turned, looking at me with suspicion. "Leaving so soon? We haven't finished the library." "I'm feeling sick," I said, and it wasn't a lie. "I'm going to my room." "Fine." Mark waved his hand dismissively. "Just don't lock the door. The appraisers are coming tomorrow morning to tag the furniture in the bedrooms." I walked out of the study, my heart beating so loud I thought they could hear it. I felt the weight of the recorder against my ribs. It felt hot, like a burning coal. Arthur had left something for me, and he had hidden it specifically from them. Lucas's bedroom. Night. Action. Trying to listen to the tape. The fear of being discovered. Emotion, paranoia, and anticipation. My bedroom was on the second floor at the end of the hall. It used to be the servants' quarters a century ago, small and modest, but it was the only place in the house that felt like mine. I locked the door, then I dragged my dresser in front of it. I was acting paranoid, I knew that, but the way Mark had looked at me, the way they were tearing the house apart, I felt like I was in enemy territory. Outside, the storm had worsened. Thunder rattled the window panes, and the wind howled through the eaves. The house groaned as if it were in pain. I sat on my bed and pulled out the recorder. It looked archaic. I pressed the eject button. The tape popped out. The truth about the wolves. I checked the batteries, dead. Of course, panic flared in my chest. I needed double-A batteries. Did I have any? I frantically searched my drawers. Nothing. I rummaged through my old backpack. Nothing. I had to go back downstairs. I unlocked the door and moved the dresser back, trying to be silent. The hallway was dark. Downstairs I could see light spilling from the kitchen. Mark and Elena were still up. I crept down the stairs, skipping the fourth step because I knew it creaked. "He doesn't suspect anything," I heard Elena say. Her voice was clear, traveling up the stairwell. I froze on the landing. "He's too soft," Mark's voice replied, followed by the clink of ice in a glass. "He thinks Arthur loved him best. Let him have his delusions. Once we find the certification of incompetence, anything Arthur signed in the last 6 months is void anyway." My blood ran cold. Certification of incompetence. "Dr. Evans is ready to sign the affidavit?" Elena asked. "For the price we agreed on." "He'd sign that Arthur was a Martian," Mark laughed. A cold, cruel sound. They weren't just looking for a will. They were planning to retroactively declare Arthur insane so they could overturn any changes he might have made. They were going to erase his mind, his legacy, just to secure the estate. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the betrayal. This was what Arthur had warned me about. I couldn't go into the kitchen for batteries now. They would see it on my face. I would scream at them, and then I would lose everything. I retreated back upstairs, my hands trembling violently. I went into the bathroom connected to the hallway. I remembered Arthur kept a flashlight in the medicine cabinet. I grabbed it, unscrewed the bottom, and shook out the batteries. Please let them have charge. Back in my room, barricaded once again, I shoved the batteries into the old recorder. I sat in the middle of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, feeling like a child again, hiding from monsters. But the monsters were downstairs drinking scotch. I took a deep breath. My thumb hovered over the play button. What if it was just rambling? What if it was just him singing or reading poetry? But the label, the truth about the wolves. I pressed play, hiss, crackle. For 10 seconds there was only static. My heart sank. Was the tape damaged? Then a sound, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, a cough, and then his voice. But it wasn't the weak, trembling voice of the Arthur I had nursed for the last year. It wasn't the voice that forgot names and confused dates. It was strong. It was deep. It was the voice of the man who had built a dynasty. "Lucas," the recording began, "if you are listening to this, then I am gone. And if you found this tape where I hid it, it means you are the only one who truly knew me." I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. Hearing him, so alive, so present, was overwhelming. "You are probably upstairs in your room right now," the voice continued, eerie in its accuracy. "And they are probably downstairs, drinking my scotch and calculating the square footage of the garden. Mark and Elena, my children who became strangers." There was a pause on the tape. I heard the strike of a match. He was lighting his pipe. "They think I lost my mind, Lucas. They think the dementia took everything." A low chuckle resonated through the speaker. "I let them think that. It is amazing what people will say in front of an old fool who they think can't understand them. I became a ghost in my own house so I could see who they really were." My eyes widened. He had been faking all of it, or at least the severity of it. "I heard them, Lucas. Last Christmas. I heard what they planned to do with you once I was gone." The tension in the room spiked. What did he mean? "They don't just want the house." Arthur's voice dropped to a growl. "They want to ruin you. They want to make sure you leave with nothing, not even your reputation. They are falsifying debts in your name, Lucas. They are setting you up to look like you stole from me." I gasped, dropping the recorder on the mattress. Stole from him? Me? I picked it up again, my hands sweating. "But I was one step ahead," Arthur said. "I have left a trail, a paper trail that proves everything, but you have to move fast. They are dangerous, and they are greedy. You have to go to the basement, tonight, before the appraisers come tomorrow." "The basement? There is a loose brick behind the wine rack," Arthur commanded. "Inside is the key to the real safe, not the one in the study, the one they don't know exists." Suddenly, I heard a sound from the hallway. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps stopping right outside my door. The doorknob turned. It rattled against the dresser I had blocked it with. "Lucas?" Mark's voice came through the wood, muffled but aggressive. "Who are you talking to in there? I heard voices." I froze. The tape was still hissing in my hand. I jammed my thumb onto the stop button. "Lucas, open the door." He started to push against the door. The dresser scraped an inch across the floor. The hallway, the basement. Action. Evading Mark, sneaking into the basement, finding the second hiding spot. Key emotion, adrenaline and disbelief. The door rattled again, harder this time. The wood groaned under the pressure of Mark's shoulder. "Lucas, I know you're in there!" I shoved the recorder under my pillow, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't let him find the tape. If he heard Arthur's voice, if he heard Arthur exposing their plan, he wouldn't just yell, he would destroy it. And he might destroy me. I forced myself to cough, a wet, sickly sound. I shuffled towards the door, dragging my feet to sound weak. I didn't move the dresser all the way, just enough to crack the door open 2 inches. The chain lock was still on. Through the crack I saw Mark's face. He looked flushed, his eyes glassy with scotch and suspicion. "What is your problem, Mark?" I rasped, rubbing my eyes. I was watching an old video on my phone, trying to sleep. "Do you have to control my grief too?" Mark stared at me, trying to peer into the room behind me. He sniffed the air, as if looking for a scent of betrayal. "I heard talking," he insisted, his voice slurring slightly. Sounded like him, like Dad. My blood froze. I was watching a video from his 80th birthday. I lied, praying my voice didn't crack. The one where he gave the speech. It comforts me. "Is that a crime, Mark? Or do I need a permit from the estate executor to miss my grandfather?" Mark stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then his expression softened, not with kindness, but with pity. The kind of pity you have for a dog you're about to put down. "Go to sleep, Lucas," he muttered, stepping back. "We have a big day tomorrow. The appraisers arrive at 8. Don't embarrass us." He turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited until I heard his bedroom door slam shut at the other end of the corridor. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I stood there, leaning against the door, trembling. They were going to frame me. That's what Arthur had said. "They are falsifying debts in your name." I couldn't sleep now. I had to get to the basement. I grabbed the flashlight and the recorder. I didn't put my shoes on. Socks were quieter on the hardwood floors. Opening my door was the loudest sound in the world. Creak. I paused, holding my breath. Silence, just the storm raging outside. I moved like a shadow through the house I grew up in. Every shadow looked like Mark, waiting to ambush me. I passed Elena's room. I could hear her snoring softly. It made me sick. How could they sleep? How could they sleep knowing they were plotting to destroy their own brother? I reached the kitchen. It was empty. The bottle of Macallan 25 was left uncorked on the counter, empty. The door to the basement was in the pantry. I opened it. The air that rushed up was cold and smelled of damp earth and old wine. I clicked on the flashlight, shielding the beam with my hand so it wouldn't reflect off the windows. I descended the wooden stairs, 1, 2, 3, 13 steps. The basement was a labyrinth of storage boxes, old furniture covered in white sheets, and Arthur's pride and joy, the wine cellar. I walked past the rows of dusty bottles. Chateau Margaux 1982, Petrus 1990. Mark had probably already calculated exactly how much these were worth. I went to the back of the rack, just as the tape had instructed, behind the wine rack, a loose brick. I crouched down. The wall was made of exposed red brick, rough and uneven. I shone the light along the mortar. There. One brick near the floor had no mortar on the left side. I put the flashlight in my mouth and used both hands to wiggle the brick. It was heavy, gritty. It scraped against the stone as I pulled it free. Behind it was a hollow space. I reached in. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out a heavy black metal lockbox. It was locked, obviously, but taped to the bottom of the box was a small key. I sat on the cold concrete floor, my back against the wine rack. I unlocked the box. Inside, there was a thick manila envelope and another cassette tape. This one was labeled, "The Evidence." I opened the envelope first. I expected a will. I expected a deed to the house. What I found was a bank statement, but not Arthur's. It was my bank statement, or rather a statement for an account in my name that I had never opened. I scanned the document, confused. The account had been opened 3 years ago. There were deposits, huge deposits, 10,000, 15,000, 50,000, all transferred from Arthur's main investment account, and then withdrawals, cash withdrawals, gambling sites, offshore transfers. My stomach churned. It looked like I had been stealing from Arthur for years. It looked like I had been siphoning his fortune while pretending to care for him. "Oh my God," I whispered. There were emails too. Printed emails, seemingly sent from my email address to Mark, asking for hush money to keep Arthur's medical conditions secret. They were fake. All of it was fake. But it looked so real. I grabbed the recorder. I ejected the first tape and put in the second one, The Evidence. I pressed play. Arthur's voice filled the basement, echoing off the stone walls. "What you are looking at, Lucas, is their masterpiece," Arthur said. His voice sounded tired now, heavy with sorrow. "Mark created the account. Eleanor forged the emails. They plan to present this to the police the day after the funeral. They aren't just cutting you out of the will, son. They are sending you to prison." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The walls of the basement were closing in on me. Prison for embezzlement, elder abuse. "They knew I was changing the will," Arthur continued. "They knew I wanted to leave the estate to the only person who didn't treat me like an ATM, so they created a narrative. Lucas manipulated the senile old man. Lucas stole his money. Lucas forced him to change the will. It's a perfect story. The judge will believe the high-powered lawyer, not the unemployed grandson." I leaned my head back against the wine rack, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just greed, it was hatred, pure, distilled hatred. They despised me because I was the one he loved. Cain and Abel, played out in forensic accounting. "But," Arthur's voice sharpened, "they made a mistake. They forgot that I built this fortune by catching liars. I have been tracking every keystroke Mark made on my computer. I have video recordings of Elena practicing your signature." My eyes snapped open. "Video? In this box," Arthur said, "is a USB drive. It contains the keylogger data, the IP addresses, and the footage from the hidden camera in the study. It proves everything. It proves the frame-up." I dug through the envelope. There it was. A small silver USB drive. The weapon that could save my life. "But that is not the worst part, Lucas," Arthur said. The tone of his voice changed. It dropped an octave. It became broken. "The money, the frame-up, I could almost forgive them for being greedy. Greed is a human sickness. But what I found out last week, that I cannot forgive." I held my breath. "What could be worse than sending your brother to prison? I found out why your medication wasn't working, Lucas." I froze. 6 months ago I had been sick. Mysterious headaches, dizziness, fatigue. Doctors couldn't explain it. I thought it was stress from caretaking. "I saw Elena switching your pills," Arthur whispered on the tape. "She was replacing your migraine medication with sedatives and something else. Something that makes you confused, makes you forget things. They wanted you to look unstable. They wanted witnesses to see you stumbling, forgetting words, just like me." My hand flew to my mouth. The dizziness, the days I lost track of time, the time I fell down the stairs and Mark told everyone I was drinking too much. They weren't just framing me, they were poisoning me. They were gaslighting you, my boy. Breaking your mind so that when they accused you, you wouldn't even have the strength to fight back. I let out a guttural sound, a mix of a sob and a scream, stifled by my hand. I looked at the silver USB drive. It wasn't just my inheritance. It was my vindication. It was their handcuffs. But then Arthur said something that stopped my heart. "But Lucas, before you use this, before you destroy them, you need to know the final secret, the one I kept even from myself for 40 years. The reason why they hate you so much, it isn't just because you are good, it's because of who you really are." The tape clicked off. End of side A. I stared at the recorder. Who I really am. I was Lucas, his grandson, their brother, wasn't I? The basement, continuing, action, flipping the tape, the emotional devastation, emotion, identity crisis, betrayal, profound loneliness. I felt numb. The cold of the basement floor had seeped into my bones, but I hardly felt it. My reality was fracturing, poisoned, framed, and now a secret about my identity. I hesitated to flip the tape. Part of me wanted to stop. I wanted to take the USB drive, run to the police, and forget the rest. I didn't want to know any more secrets. I had reached my limit of pain for one night. Some stories stay silent for years because the truth is too heavy to carry. If you've ever discovered a truth that made you question who you are, or if you've ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you, you're not alone. We survive these things, but we are never the same. I flipped the tape. Side B. I pressed play. "You always wondered why you were so different from them," Arthur began. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. "Mark and Elena are like their mother, my late wife, Sarah, cold, calculating, driven by status. But you are like your mother, my mother," I whispered. "My mother had died in a car crash when I was 2. My father, Arthur's son, died with her. That's the story I was told." "You are not my grandson, Lucas," Arthur said. The world stopped. The hum of the refrigerator upstairs, the storm outside, my own heartbeat, everything went silent. "You are my son." I stared at the spinning wheels of the cassette tape. "No, that's impossible." "40 years ago," Arthur continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "I had an affair, a woman I loved deeply. She passed away giving birth to you. My wife. She knew. She agreed to raise you as our grandchild to avoid the scandal, to protect the family name. We told everyone you were the child of our estranged son who died." I felt like I was floating outside my body. My brother was my nephew. My sister was my niece. "Mark and Eleanor found out 10 years ago," Arthur said. "That's when they changed. That's when the hate started. They don't hate you because you're a mooching grandson. They hate you because you are their half-brother. And under the terms of my original trust, the one I made before they were born, any direct child of mine gets a double share." I put my head between my knees. I couldn't breathe. It all made sense. The coldness, the exclusion, the way Mark would look at me with disgust. They weren't just greedy siblings. They were legitimate children furious at the bastard son who threatened their slice of the pie. They know, Lucas. And they are terrified that you will find out, because if you prove paternity, their claim to the estate is cut in half. That is why they want you in prison. That is why they want you ruined, to invalidate you. I started to cry. Not the quiet tears of grief, but ugly, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. My whole life was a lie. My parents in the photo albums. They were strangers. Arthur, the man I called Grandpa, was my father, and he had waited until he was dead to tell me. He had left me alone in a house with wolves, armed only with a cassette tape. I felt a surge of anger towards him. "Why didn't you tell me when you were alive? Why didn't you hold me and call me your son?" "I know you are angry," Arthur said, as if reading my mind from beyond the grave. "I was a coward, Lucas. I chose my reputation over my son, and I paid for it every day. But now I am giving you the power to set it right. The DNA test is in the box. I did it 5 years ago. It's sealed. I looked in the box again. Under the envelope, there was a sealed medical packet. You have a choice, Lucas, Arthur said. You can take the USB drive and the DNA test, and you can destroy them. You can take everything. You can leave them with nothing. You can put Mark in jail for fraud and Eleanor for poisoning. You can burn their lives to the ground, just like they tried to burn yours. The tape paused. Or, I waited. Or you can show them mercy. A mercy they do not deserve. The choice is yours. But remember, you are the one with the power now. The wolves are at the door, but you are the lion. The tape clicked off. Silence returned to the basement. I sat there for a long time, holding the DNA test in one hand and the USB drive in the other. I was the lion. I wiped the tears from my face. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had poisoned me. They had framed me. They had tried to erase me. I stood up. My legs were steady now. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I heard a noise upstairs, a floorboard creaking in the kitchen. Then the basement door handle turned. Lucas? Mark's voice. He wasn't asleep. He had followed me. The door opened. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness of the stairs, hitting me squarely in the face. "What are you doing down here?" Mark demanded, descending the stairs. Eleanor was behind him, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of suspicion. I didn't flinch. I didn't hide the box. I held up the tape recorder. "I'm listening to Dad," I said. Mark stopped dead on the last step. "Dad? You mean Grandpa?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Mark, I know. The basement. Action, the confrontation, the shift of power, key emotion, vindication and justice. The silence that followed my words was heavy enough to crush bones. No, Mark, I know." Mark's face went from flushed to chalk white in a split second. Elena, standing behind him, tightened her grip on her silk robe, her knuckles turning white. The arrogance that usually defined them, the posture, the sneer, evaporated. For the first time, I didn't see my successful older siblings. I saw two terrified children caught with their hands in the jar. You're talking nonsense," Mark stammered, but his voice lacked its usual legal precision. "You're tired, Lucas. You're grieving." "Dad? That's insane." "Is it?" I asked, my voice steady, echoing off the cold stone walls. "Is it as insane as switching my migraine medication for sedatives, Elena?" Elena gasped, taking a sharp step back. Her heel clicked loudly on the concrete. I don't know what you're talking about." "Arthur knew," I said, stepping forward. They stepped back. The predator and prey dynamic had flipped instantly. "He saw you, Eleanor. He saw you in the kitchen, grinding the pills. He saw you mixing them into my tea. He recorded it." I held up the silver USB drive. It caught the light of Mark's flashlight, gleaming like a blade. "And you, Mark," I continued, turning my gaze to him. "He tracked every single transfer you made to that offshore account in the Caymans. He has the keylogger data. He has the IP addresses. He watched you frame me for embezzlement while sitting in his wheelchair, pretending to be confused." Mark looked at the USB drive, then at the black box in my other hand. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was a lawyer. He was assessing the risk. He was wondering if he could physically take it from me. He took a step toward me. "Lucas, listen. Give me the drive. We can talk about this. We can restructure the estate, a third each, fair and square." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "A third? You think I want a cut of the money you tried to steal?" "Don't be stupid," Mark hissed, his desperation showing. "If that drive goes to the police, the estate will be frozen for years. Nobody gets paid. The lawyers will eat it all. Do you want that? Do you want to destroy Arthur's legacy?" "Arthur's legacy isn't the money, Mark," I said softly. "It's the truth. And as for the estate, it's not yours to negotiate anymore." I reached into the box and pulled out the sealed medical packet. I held it up so they could read the label. DNA paternity test. Subject A, Arthur Sterling. Subject B, Lucas Sterling. The original trust fund, I said, reciting the words Arthur had told me on the tape. Clause 4, Section B. In the event of a direct biological child surfacing, the estate is divided per stirps, with the biological child retaining executive control over the family assets. Elena let out a whimper. She knew the clause. She knew the will better than anyone. You knew, I said, looking at her. You both knew I was your brother. That's why you hated me. Not because I was a leech, but because I was the rightful heir. You were a mistake, Elena screamed, her composure finally snapping. You were just some dirty little secret he kept from Mom. You don't deserve this house. You don't deserve his name. Maybe, I said calmly, but he gave it to me. Mark lunged. It was a desperate, clumsy move. He dropped the flashlight and reached for the box, but I was ready. I sidestepped, and he crashed into the wine rack. A bottle of 1982 Bordeaux shattered on the floor, spilling red wine like blood across the concrete. Don't, I warned him. I already emailed the files to his lawyer, and to yours, Mark. Mark froze on the floor, on his knees in the puddle of wine. He looked up at me, eyes wide with horror. You didn't. 10 minutes ago, I lied. I hadn't yet, but they didn't know that. The timer was set. If I didn't enter a code by midnight, the emails would send automatically. Arthur set it up. It was a bluff Arthur would have been proud of. Mark slumped against the rack, defeated. He knew that if the partners at his firm saw evidence of him defrauding a client, his own father, his career was over. He would be disbarred. He would go to prison. Elena was sobbing now, sliding down the wall to sit on the stairs. Please, Lucas, please. I can't go to jail. I have the gallery. I have reputation. You should have thought about that before you poisoned me, I said, my voice cold. I looked at them, the wolves, the people I had spent my whole life trying to impress, trying to please, the people who had made me feel small, stupid, and worthless. They looked so small now. I could destroy them. I could send them to prison for 20 years. I could watch them rot. I looked at the tape recorder in my hand. You can show them mercy, Arthur had said. A mercy they do not deserve. Get out, I said. They looked at me, confused. Get out of this house, I commanded. Tonight. Right now. You leave everything. You don't take a painting. You don't take a spoon. You get in your cars and you drive away. And the drive? Mark asked, his voice trembling. If you sign over your rights to the estate to me, completely, and if you never step foot on this property again, I won't send the evidence to the district attorney. It was the mercy Arthur spoke of. I wouldn't put them in a cage, but I would exile them. I would take away the only thing they cared about, the money. You can't leave us with nothing, Elena cried. I'm leaving you with your freedom, I said, which is more than you were going to leave me. Mark stood up slowly. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in his life. He saw the resemblance. He saw Arthur's eyes in my face. He didn't say a word. He grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her up. They walked up the stairs, past me, without looking back. I listened to their footsteps crossing the kitchen floor, then the front door opening, then the sound of engines starting in the driveway. And then silence. I was alone in the basement. I looked down at the shattered wine bottle. I looked at the recorder. I did it, Dad, I whispered. The wolves are gone. The house, next morning, in cemetery. Action, the aftermath. Lucas embracing his new reality. Key emotion, peace, melancholy, and hope. The next morning, the sun broke through the storm clouds. The light streamed into the kitchen, illuminating the empty Scotch bottle they had left behind. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the scary, hollow silence of before. It was a peaceful silence. The house felt lighter, as if it too had been holding its breath while they were here. I walked into the study. I didn't clean up the mess they made. I would do that later. I sat in Arthur's chair, my father's chair. I picked up the phone and called the lawyer. I told him everything. I sent the files, not to the police, but to the firm to secure the estate transfer. Mark and Eleanor signed the papers 3 days later. They didn't fight. They knew I held the nuclear codes. I never saw them again. I heard Mark moved to London. Elena closed her gallery and moved upstate. They were alive. They were free. But they were out of my life. A week later, I stood at the cemetery. It was a small private ceremony. Just me, the lawyer, and a few of Arthur's old friends who had been pushed away by Mark and Elena over the years. I stood over the fresh grave. The headstone read, Arthur Sterling, beloved father and grandfather. I placed a single white rose on the dirt. I kept the house, I told him, speaking to the wind. I'm turning the library into a reading room for the neighborhood kids, and I'm fixing up the garden, just like you wanted. I touched the cold stone, and I listened to the rest of the tape, I whispered. I had listened to the very end of Side B the night before. Arthur hadn't just left instructions. He had left a goodbye. Lucas, he had said at the very end of the recording, I am sorry I didn't claim you in life. I was trying to protect you from the vipers, but I realize now that you didn't need my protection. You were always stronger than them. You have a heart, son. And in the end, that is the only legacy that matters. Don't let this world turn you cold. Stay warm. Stay kind. That is your true inheritance. I wiped a tear from my cheek. I wasn't just the caretaker anymore. I wasn't just the good grandson. I was the keeper of the truth. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots. I looked back at the cemetery one last time. Family isn't just blood. Sometimes blood is the very thing that poisons you. Family are the people who see you, the people who protect you when you can't protect yourself. Arthur had protected me from beyond the grave. And now it was my turn to live the life he wanted for me. A life without wolves. I got into my car and drove home. My home. Stories like this exist because someone lived them and someone listened. We often think we know the people closest to us, but every house has its secrets, and every floorboard might hide a truth we aren't ready for. If you believe that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie, and if you think these stories deserve to be remembered, you are always welcome here. My name is Lucas, and this was my truth. Until the next story.